So just to review from last week, so we met Micah. Remember, Micah is the guy who originally pillaged his own mother, and then she lays out a curse, and he panics, so he returns everything without an apology or paying interest, nothing. He just returns it. And instead of reprimanding her own son, she blesses him. And what he wants is the blessing. So he thinks, if I take a portion of the money that I stole, and through my mother, we order on Amazon an idol, a shrine, and the teraphim, all this sort of stuff. And he sets up a whole shrine in his house, hires out his son, because he's a cheapo, and he says, okay, now I've got a little temple inside my living room. And then he runs into a Levite, and he says, oh, this is better, my son. You're fired. He goes Donald Trump on his son from The Apprentice, not the president. So he hires out a Levite. And what we discover is that the Levite is willing to serve anyone if they pay enough. He is a spiritual harlot. You remember that in the Bible, idolatry is a form of spiritual adultery, harlotry. And this story illustrates it so well. Well, then the story moves. So last week what we saw were the wandering Danites. Remember, the Danites don't really have a home. And we talked about why that is, even though Joshua gave them some land. And so they're looking for a better land. And they send out spies. Remember all the parallels with the story of Moses sending out the spies into Jericho and into the Promised Land, all that. A lot of parallels. They send out some spies. They meet the Levite at Micah's house. Micah's not there, apparently. And then they find the city of Laish. They think, this is the Promised Land. So the spies come back and they say, we got to go pillage. And what we see is that what Micah did to his mother is what the Danites are going to do to Micah. And it's a really well-crafted story. So we looked at the wandering Danites last week. Let's turn to the pillaging Danites, starting in verse 14. It says, Judges 18, starting in verse 14. Then the 5 men who had gone to scout out the country of Laish said to their brothers, do you know that in these houses there are an ephod, household gods, a carved image, and a metal image? Now therefore consider what you will do. And they turned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite, and at the home of Micah, and asked him about his welfare. Now the 600 men of the Danites, armed with their weapons of war, stood by the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men who had gone to scout out the land went up and entered and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, and the metal image, while the priests stood by the entrance of the gate with the 600 men armed with weapons of war. And when these went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household gods, and the metal image, the priest said to him, what are you doing? And they said to him, keep quiet, put your hand on your mouth, and come with us, and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for you to be priest to the house of one man, or be priest to a tribe and clan in Israel? And the priest's heart was glad. He took the ephod and the household gods, and the carved image, and went along with the people. So they turned and departed, putting the little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. They had gone a distance from the home of Micah. The men who were in the house near Micah's house were called out, and they overtook the people of Dan. And they shouted to the people of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, what is the matter with you that you come up with such a company? And he said, you take my gods that I made and the priest and go away. What have I left? How then do you ask me, what is the matter with you? And the people of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household. Then the people of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. Now, so Micah, remember, he wants the blessing of God, or a God, I guess you can say. And you can see it's not going too well for him. So basically what it is, spies come and say, you're not going to believe what we found. We found Micah, and he seems to be a rather wealthy guy, and we found Laish. And so what they decide is, we're going to round up the boys, 600 men, which is not a large army by judges' standards, but it's large enough. I mean, I don't want 600 men showing up at our house. During COVID, SWAT got called down our street. It was one of the most exciting days of COVID. I mean, my wife and I were just looking out the window like the rednecks we are. I mean, we just, look. Now, there was at least 20 cops in our front yard. The house was just right over here, and from our front yard. And so the cops are hanging around. And yell at anyone that dare come out of their house, And I thought, 20 armed cops, that's more than enough for me, okay? Now, this is 600, okay? So yeah, it's not the large army you see elsewhere in Judges. It's large enough for them to become knocking on your door. So they've arrived, and they do to Micah what they intend to do to the city of Laish. They come to pillage. They are Vikings. And so you see there, verse 14, they announce their greed. Do you know that in these houses, Micah probably owns a lot of property, a lot of houses. There's an ephod, household gods, carved image, and metal image. We're going to see why those things in particular show up. One, it's part of the narrative. But so there may be a financial benefit of this. These are valuable, yes. But really, they want the religious imagery to come with them. So they say, look, here's something valuable. In greed, they just want to go take it. Right? So this is the sin of covetousness. And covetousness leads to thievery. They curry favor with the Levite. I love this verse 15. They turned aside, came to the young Levite, and asked him about his welfare. It's kind of odd. You're like, I'm fine. Why are there 600 of you at my front door? But they're gonna play nice cop before they play bad cop, right? And of course, they're suggesting they're coming in peace. They're just passing along their way. They intimidate him, verse 16, and then they just take his stuff. They take Micah's stuff. And this, of course, is his idol and the stand that it's on. The priestly ephod, which he probably uses for divination. The teraphim, which is the household gods, probably in the form of ancestors and the spirit of the ancestor and all that sort of. That shows up all over the Bible. And then... lastly, they blackmail the Levite, verses 18 and 20. And so the Levite's like, I'm sorry, what are you doing? And they just say to him, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just worry about something else. And then they make him an offer he can't refuse. Is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or to be the priest to a tribe and clan in Israel? Which one sounds more prestigious to you? Now, more than that is, how is he going to be the priest of the one man when all the goodies are gone? So it's presented as a promotion, when in reality it's do you want a job? Because if you stay here, you have no job. And so they appeal to his own greed. So the greed of the Danites is the same sort of greed you now see of the Levites. They're just motivated by what is best for them. Right? This is the spirit. It's the spirit of violence and pillaging and all that. They are Vikings through their core, which is what you expect from a godless society. And so you'll notice there, verse 20, his heart was glad. It's a similar language to when Micah offered him to stay with him. He was content to dwell with the man. Which is the same thing that was said of Moses. So he is, yet again, portrayed as a spiritual harlot. He has sold himself to the highest bidder. Now, you turn to verse 21, and Micah gets home, and he realizes the Levite's gone. He's not a priest, even though he goes by priest. He's a Levite, but nevertheless, he's... his priest that he hired out is gone. Not only that, but his shrine is gone. I mean, imagine walking into the church and just everything's gone. You're like, oh yeah, a group of people came in, started their own church, and thought, why buy stuff when you could just take it from the, I mean, there was no one here on Saturday, so we didn't think you needed it. So they just took it, And so Micah's like, this ain't right. And he knows what happens, that these traveling band of Danites have done it. So he decides to... investigate, if you will. So what does he do? He rounds up his neighbors or his clan. Remember, he has multiple houses, and he pursues him. Now notice Micah is going to try to do to the Danites what the Danites have done to him. He's going to round up the posse, and he's going to go find what has been stolen and take it back. Now, if this sounds familiar, I keep mentioning Vikings, but this is what Vikings do. So you all know, you're going to roll your eyes, my favorite story in all the world is, of course, Beowulf. All right, so if you read it, it's about Viking angst, if you can believe that exists, okay? It's an exhausting story. So, the dragon in it, spoiler, there's dragons, why it's a cool story, he hoards gold. Now, where did the dragon get his gold? He killed everybody and just hoarded it for himself. So when a little thief comes in and steals a small cup of gold, the dragon goes crazy and starts killing everybody. Now he has all this gold, but he loses a little bit, and he just starts burning cities down. That's where Beowulf has to go fight, all that sort of stuff. That's what Micah's having here. And so the point is that Vikings go and steal gold, and then they return. Someone else discovers, hey, they got a bunch of gold. Let's go steal their gold. And they return. And then everyone's like, hey, did you hear they got gold? And they go and steal that gold, and they return. They're like, hey, did you hear about all that gold they got? And they go and steal the gold. And, like, this is the cycle of violence. And you're seeing this here. So Micah wants the blessing. He thinks, okay, I've got the priest, I got everything. And then the Danites show up. And what are the Danites going to do? They're going to steal everything. They're going to set it up for themselves. And what's Micah going to do? Well, I want it back. So he rounds up his band of merry men, and he's going to go get it. Well, guess what's going to happen to the Danites? Someone's going to discover, hey, look at all this valuable land. Because they're going to go steal from the people in Laish, this great land. Someone else is going to notice the great land. They're going to come and steal it. This is the history of humanity. It's the history of humanity until Christianity shows up. This is actually why I love Beowulf, because it's edited, perhaps even written, probably edited by monks on this end of the conversion of the Vikings. Because it's a British book about the Vikings, which is weird. But he says what ended the cycle of violence among the Vikings and humanity in general? Christianity. How do you end that cycle of violence? You tell a story about a man who succumbed to death and he conquered it. Violence ends. Enough blood's been shed. Right? So you see this cycle of violence right here. So he's going to round up the boys, and he's able to catch up with them. The distance is quite long by the time he's able to do all this. He catches up with them, so the Danites don't seem to be in a hurry. And he is rightly incensed. I want to be sympathetic to the dude and say, yeah, that's not good, your stuff got stolen. You shouldn't have stolen from your mother, but we won't talk about that. Yeah, your stuff shouldn't have been stolen. I'm sorry about that. But I want you to notice verse 24. It says, and he said, you take my gods that I made and the priest and go away, and what have I left? How then do you ask me what is the matter with you? Part of that's just funny, isn't it? Is that Micah shows up and they're like, can I help you? Like, you stole my stuff. What do you mean, can you help me? Yeah, give me my stuff back. Like, oh yeah, yeah, about that. But as the reader, notice what Micah's saying here. Okay, let the sentence just ring. You stole my gods. You think sound bizarre there? Yeah. God can be stolen? Isn't that bizarre? It's really bizarre to us on this end of Christianity. To the ancient world, now, it's not that the idols were divine in and of themselves. But they were idols. They fell down before them. And so the Bible makes fun of this notion. One of the funniest passages in all the Bible is when God mocks idols. This is Isaiah chapter 44. It says, and all who fashion idols are nothing, and the things they delight in do not profit. That's a good thesis statement. The ironsmith takes a cutting tool and works it over the coals. He fashions it with hammers and works it with his strong arm. He becomes hungry. His strength fails. He drinks no water and is faint. The carpenter stretches a line. He marks it out with a pencil. He shapes it with planes and marks it with the compass. He shapes it into the figure of a man, with the beauty of a man to dwell in a house. Sounds like Micah. He cuts down cedars, or he chooses a cypress tree or an oak and lets it grow strong among the trees of the forest. He plants a cedar, and the rain nourishes it. Then it becomes fuel for a man. He takes a part of it and warms himself. He kindles a fire and bakes bread, and he makes a god and worships it. He said, this tree kept you warm. This tree becomes divine. Same carpenter, same ironsmith. It's the same dudes. He makes it an idol and falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. Over the half he eats meat. He roasts and is satisfied. Also he warms himself and says, "Aha, I am warm. I have seen the fire." And the rest of it he makes into a god, his idol, and falls down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, "Deliver me, for you are my God." Isn't that great? The Bible has all kinds of humor in it, if you'll just let it be funny. And this is a great example of it. God is mocking idols and those who would worship. And it's a valid point, isn't it? It's a valid point that this same wood or whatever, you would use it to cook your meals, you would use it to keep you warm, or you would use it to sustain your faith. Makes no sense. This is why the Israelites come along, and they're unique in history to say, don't make any graven image of God. You can't. You diminish his glory when you do that. You can't lose me. You can't steal me. You can't run from me. Ask Jonah. You can't do any of that. That's crazy talk. Now, they do understand that God can dwell in the temple, but they also understand God isn't bound to that temple. He is greater than the cosmos. The earth is his footstool. This is unique in the ancient world. So here we get a story, and it's got humorous notes in it. What do you want, Micah? What do you mean, what do I want? I want my stuff back. And then we're asked, well, what stuff is it? Gods have been stolen from a dude's house. Why didn't the God just sort of like keep the Danites out? It's exactly the challenge Elijah has on the top of Mount Carmel. Your God must be using the restroom. He's out on a long journey. Here, let me show you what Yahweh does. I don't need images. I don't need to cut myself. I don't need funny chants. I don't need to spend hours doing it. Watch this. Done. It's supposed to be ridiculous. The idea that your gods can be stolen and your gods need you to rescue them. It's bizarre, and yet this would have been common. So what do the Danites do? They do what you always do, is you threaten. Sicilian?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, oh, it's a shame. Some bad guys might prick you.
Oh, yeah, they're mobsters. Yeah, it's a shame, you know. I'm walking here, you know. Yes, they're very much mob-like, okay? Yeah, Don. Yes, the New Testament mentions that. Yeah.
So that opens the door for this thing, and there is some activity that you can recognize.
Yeah, so the Bible would relate idolatry to the demonic. So we've talked about this, and we can't chase your rabbit, but there's the ordinary demonic and extraordinary demonic. When we think of demonic, we think of the extraordinary that Hollywood tries to portray. The ordinary demonic is lies and violence and idolatry and sexual sin and a host of other things. Gossip is one.
I think that passage where it says we wrestle not with flesh and blood.
Yeah.
What the Bible is probably trying to explain like that.
And the ancient world understood that better than we do. We've been so modernized, even we Christians. Yeah. But if you can see the damage that, say, gossip does, because we don't think of gossip as demonic, if you can just see the damage it does and really reflect on it, you can say that's demonic. Or violence, or sexual sin can destroy ministries, or houses, or churches, or communities, or whatever. It's demonic. It's exactly what the demonic would want. And idolatry is one of them. Because you can see the madness. The whole story is crazy. Of Mike and the net, it's a crazy story. It's a ridiculous story. It gets worse in the last 3 chapters. That story is... It's worse, literally. We're to conclude the Israelites are worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. And you think, well, how do you get there? Idolatry. It is demonic. And what does the demonic want? Read the story. This is what we want. It's a cycle of violence, signs of threat of violence, and you get idolatry in the name of like honest worship. You know, he thinks he's doing God's will because he got a Levite. That's what the Bible tells me to do. Yeah, it's demonic. So now I do want to remind you when they make their threat, we're gonna kill you and the whole family. Yeah, you know. But remember that Micah was trying to avoid the curse. And what has he got in the end? He's got his curse, not his blessing, but his curse. And so, all right, this leads finally to the conquering Danites, verses 27 to 31. But the people of Dan took what Micah had made. Now again, what did he make? God. You got to pause there and let that sink in. It's weird. Now remember that whenever people shape their lives around their sports team or their entertainment options or their children or Taylor Smith. I love calling her Taylor Smith because it just does that to Gen Zers. They hate when I call her that. Their celebrity culture or their wealth or whatever, it is equally foolish to wrap your entire identity around something other than Christ. Because Christ has at least conquered the grave. Go on. So the people of Dan took what Micah had made, and the priests who belonged to him. Now remember, the priest doesn't belong to man. The priest is supposed to belong to God. You see, when everyone does what is right in their own eyes, there's no king in Israel, everything is upside down. Right? We have felt this as Christians as we become more of a post-Christian society. What was once up is now down. What was once wrong is now right. And we feel like we're experiencing vertigo as believers, don't we? Things aren't right. And we know it's obvious that it's not right. But to the world succumb to godlessness, blindness rules the day. You know, and this world makes sense to them. So we got to move. We've got to finish the passage. So the priest who belongs to him, they came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting. We'll come back to that. And struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. There was no deliverance because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rahab. Then they rebuilt the city and lived in it. And they named the city Dan, after the name of Dan, their ancestor, who was born to Israel. But the name of the city was Laish at the first. The people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves. Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Danites until the day of the captivity land. So they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh. By the way, because I may forget later, if you're interested in archaeology, some interesting things are being discovered at Shiloh, this site. So if you're interested in archaeology, don't go to bed tonight. Just do research. It'd be well worth your time. Okay, so what's interesting about this passage is the writer wants us to be sympathetic to Gentiles. Right? They're the innocent people here. Micah, the Jew, isn't innocent. Levite, the Jew, isn't innocent. The Danites, the Jewish tribe, they're not innocent. The Gentiles are. Right? They're at peace. They're leaving everybody alone. They're not bothering anybody. And all of a sudden, it's the supposed people of God who come and invade. Now, the Danites are, in one sense, carrying out the orders of Joshua to clear the land of the Canaanites. But the problem is the Danites have first become Canaanites. So this act of clearing the land is not a cleansing of the land. They have been corrupt, and actually they're making it worse because they're more corrupt than the Gentile city people of Laish. So it's just wickedness. So notice verse 27 that the people of Laish are described as quiet and unsuspecting. So initially what we see is that it's not a warring people. They're not ready for battle because they're not looking for it. What's the old saying? If you want to avoid trouble, don't go looking for it. And that's them. They're not looking for it. They're a peaceful people, at least at this time. And so we, the reader, see this as a tragedy committed by those whom God are God's covenant people. The word quiet there is always in reference to people living in peace. What's interesting is that what they are expecting, a quiet life, a peaceful life, is what God promised the Israelites in the promised land. Again, we are sympathetic to the Gentiles. The writer is saying the Jewish people here, the Hebrews, are the Canaanites. The Canaanites look like Hebrews because it's the Canaanites experiencing what God has promised the Hebrews. So I'm going to show you how this word works. Joshua 11:23. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that Yahweh said unto Moses. Joshua gave it inheritance to Israel according to division by the tribes, and the land was quiet. It rested from war. That's the word. Same thing, Joshua 14:15, and the land had rested from war. That sounds like the city of Laish, doesn't it? They were quiet. They were at peace. They rested. Judges 3:11, and the land had rest 40 years in Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. So again, it's what do the judges accomplish? They bring in part what Joshua had hoped to accomplish on the full. So Othniel is with these tribes, and those tribes, while he was their judge, experienced what Laish was experiencing. And then Judges 8. Thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, story of Gideon. So they lifted up their heads no more, and the country was in quietness. There's that word, rest. 40 years in the days of Gideon. So again, notice that in Judges, when Israel experiences rest, quietness, what happens? Unbelieving pagans come in and ruin that. It's the opposite now. You have Canaanites who are experiencing rest, their own Garden of Eden. And that's how the city's been described until not the Canaanites come, but the Hebrews come, and they interrupt that. And how is it replaced? More chaos, more violence, and everything else. So that's quiet. The word unsuspecting means to trust or to have confidence in someone or something. So Judges 9:26 is an example of this. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brethren and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. Well, that's a perfectly fine translation, unsuspecting to confident. That is to say that when they're such at peace, they get along with everybody, that it never crossed their mind that the Danites, they've never had dealings with them, they're not bothered by them, would just randomly show up one day and start killing them and burning their city down. They had the confidence of people. Regardless, that's what the Danites do. They pillage and they slaughter. They burn the city down. Now you remember that one of the advantages of the city of Laish was they go after the way of the Sidonians. Probably they're organized in a certain way, but they're too far away from Sidon for them to be protected by them. This has always been a problem in the world. When Kentucky was being settled, it was Virginia County. One of the challenge here was, what do you do with criminals? If you are in Virginia, where horseback and boats are your fastest form of transportation, how effective is the Virginian government going to be? And what if the person in question isn't a Virginian? They're from Pennsylvania, and they came down the Riffner. You can see that so Kentucky was kind of a hard, you had to be a tough dude. You never left without your gun. And actually, that's why the church was so important. The church policed communities through church discipline. So if you read Old Minutes, that's the context of Pioneer, Kentucky. So too, that side or Laish is too far away. There's no one here to come help them. They are on their own and they are defenseless. And so what do the Danites do? They slaughter everyone, they burn it down, and they take possession of the land. And then they rename it after themselves. Of course they did. Now it says they named it after their ancestor, whom they just so happened to be named after. I'll let you decide who they really named it after. But it's the son of Jacob. It adds to the story, doesn't it, that these are descendants of the patriarchs. The ones whom God has set up to be his chosen people. And all these generations later, God's chosen people has become this. There was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This is what it looks like. And you'll notice there, verse 30 and 31, they take the idols of Micah, and they set them up. And they officially become a pagan people. Now they can use the name of Yahweh, they can read from Deuteronomy all they want to, but this is paganism. It is not the Hebrew religion. Now, here is the surprise of the story. I think the Bibles are really written stories. I think that quality storytelling. So far, the Levite hasn't had a name. It's just been the Levite or the priest. We got Micah's name. But we haven't got the Levite, and he's played an essential role in the story. He is what has moved the narrative along, and yet he doesn't have a name. Now, the reason is because once you get to the end and you're exhausted by the Danites, think about it. The wicked prosper in the story. And it seems as if God has left the land. They've become so wicked, God in judgment has handed them over to their own vices. So instead of protecting the innocent, the wicked are prospering. And there's a priest in their midst. And you're thinking, well, who is this guy? He's a Levite. And so the writer saves this detail at the very end. He says, I'll tell you exactly who it is. And you see his name there in verse 30. It's verse 30. Am I right? Yeah, verse 30. And people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Danites. We'll pause there. Now, next to Moses, does your Bible have a little number next to probably the number 1? It's a footnote. I'm a footnote guy. I'm a footnote nerd. I can't stand endnotes. I am not going to turn to the back of the book and risk losing where I left off. They belong at the bottom of the page like your Bible does. Endnotes are ungodly. And I don't like this idea, well, footnotes are for academic books, endnotes are for more popular books. No. If you have something to add to the discussion, give that to me right there where we're having the discussion. Now, what were we talking about? Oh, yeah. Your Bible probably says as a footnote, or Manasseh. So what you have here is a manuscript issue. And from the leading theory is the idea that the grandson of Moses is this Levite was so appalling to so many people, they wanted to push the generations back a little bit. So whether he is the grandson of Moses or the great-great or whatever of Moses, I don't think that really matters. What is the writer telling you? That if you go back to Moses and you follow his ancestry and you get their stories, what do you find? It did not take a long time. Within 100 years, you go from the great Moses carrying the law of God after being in his presence for weeks upon weeks upon weeks. And within a few generations, they are pillaging innocent people, burning cities, not as the Hebrew people, but as Canaanites. And you'll notice here it says that his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. Now, the predominant reading of that is that this line of Danites, or at least in the city of Danites, starting here, you get this form of paganism from this time within 100 generations of Moses, those who enter the promised land, all the way to this Assyrian captivity. You get hundreds of years of this sort of religion. Godlessness. And these are supposed to be the people of God. Others see this as an earlier captivity. It all depends on how you date the book of Judges and where's their later editors. But it's a shocking revelation at the end. You think, okay, this is bad. Then you realize just how bad it is. The line of Moses. This is what it produces. Don.
What's the date you're talking about?
Well, within about 100 years of Moses.
I noticed that they get help from Manasseh. So that would be after Moses.
Yeah, so your footnote says Manasseh?
In the version, King James says Manasseh.
It says son of Manasseh? Yeah, so that's a good example of what manuscripts...
Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh.
Yeah, so the King James translators, not just King James, but William Tyndale, the Bishop's Bible, the Geneva Bible, all of those, the Matthew Bible, all of those are using a certain group of manuscripts that the earliest date of most of those is about 1,000 years after the New Testament concluded. Your modern translations are using earlier manuscripts. And so one of the difference you're going to get from these two groups is this right here. So the goal is of translation, the general rule is the closer to the original autograph or the original writing, the more accurate the manuscript. That's a general rule. So if we have, say, we have an early copy of the Gospel of John within 100 years of its publication. So we think it's a parchment. So we think that is our most accurate depiction of that section of John. So the King James, because all they had were these older manuscripts, well, I guess younger manuscripts if you want to, it had Manasseh. But the older manuscripts, earlier manuscripts, they say Moses. And what most agree, and I've not studied the manuscript history of this. A lot of scholars believe that the reason you have the change is to vindicate Moses. And so you're pushing that generation back a little bit. But even if it is Manasseh, and that's possible, you still have the line of Moses within a few generations going apostate. It's an astounding statement, particularly for the Hebrew people. Here's someone that you elevate way up here, and you discover within a few generations that family has gone apostate. Yeah, we talked about that last week, didn't we? Yeah, I mean, look at this. I mean, that seems to be the implication. I read it as the Assyrian captivity. I could be wrong on that. But this was their pattern, which means they never repented of their sin. It's a striking statement. By the way, in case you want to know, this is the first Jonathan we meet in the Bible. How about that for a setup? Why there's more Jonathans, I don't know. There are 10 of them in the Bible. How many can you name? Don't do that. You can't. The name means Yahweh has given. And this is a story about what has been taken. It's so good, isn't it? It's just so good. So it usually reflects the faith of the parents. So Jonathan, most famous Jonathan, is of course the son of Saul. It's a reflection of the faith of parents. And maybe that's the case here, but it's a sad story. Now, you remember, if he is the son of Moses, this Levite is not to be a priest, because the priests are lines of Aaron. Now let's go back to the story of Moses. Moses, I believe, and I could be wrong in this, you guys who know more than I do can correct me, I think Moses originally was supposed to be the line of the high priests. You remember how Moses kept complaining? I can't talk, don't want to do this, get me out of this. And God says, okay, fine, get Aaron. And Aaron becomes the line of priests. Because the brothers, they're both of Levi, sons of Levi. But the line of priests goes through Aaron, not Moses. And I've always thought it was originally supposed to go through Moses, because he would embody the royal priesthood sort of imagery of the Bible. And so here's a guy taking for himself what was not given to him, which is kind of the story of Moses, the opposite. He refused to accept what was given to him. It's just the Bible is a well-written story. Gershom, so you have Jonathan, the son of Gershom. Gershom was the son of Moses. So if you take the earlier manuscripts that your modern translation is using, it reads more naturally, Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses. So, but it's possible that it's Manasseh who had a son named Gershom because of his line. That's very possible. So did I put the verse up here? Just kind of, yeah, Exodus 2. Zipporah gave birth to a son. He called his name Gershom. I've been a sojourner in a foreign land. Now, some translators would say the word son here is Ben, where we get Benjamin and other uses of it. It means son. Yes, that's the usual name. It could mean grandson or descendant of, but it means son. And the point isn't those specifics. It's within a few generations, it's gone completely apostates. So this ends in a rather shocking way. So we didn't like the guy, then we discover who he is, and we're pulled emotionally. Now I want to like the guy. Look at his ancestry. But I can't. This is what happens with partial obedience. And this is what happens after generation after generation of not passing on the faith. It doesn't take long before what is believed becomes assumed, which becomes rejected. We've experienced that in America, haven't we? And you can see that what becomes of those who were once the people of God become like their neighbors. Everything Moses warned them about, they have become. It's a real warning to us, because much of the church is going the same direction, which is why we have to be faithful to Scripture. The other, Don? Yeah.
But it was too hard.
Yeah. so they were given land, but you have to wonder, why wasn't it enough? Had they been invaded? Where they having to fight their neighbors. And instead of trusting that God would deliver them and cleaning the land to begin with, they decide, what we're going to do, we're going to abandon what God has given us and take what he hasn't given us. That's the pillaging. That's the covetousness. And you can see what comes of that. This is the history of humanity right here, until Christianity shows up. But as you see Christianity decline in various areas, what replaces it? It's this right here. This right here. So, all right, anything else? Don, you have anything?
No, just that these items lead is some of the things that came into America. You get weaken the government, certain demonic things,
Mm-hmm.
take the Ten Commandments out, things like that. They did similar things to Israel,
Mm-hmm.
just so to speak.
Yeah.
What they represent seems to be pretty common, like Molech, that's where you get your abortions and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Yeah, so,
It's not that people are black-minded, they've got input.
yeah. One of the big themes of Judges is syncretism. And the biggest threats to Israel in this time is syncretism. There's no king in Israel. Everyone is right in their own eyes. So they didn't clear the land. So what they did was, let's just get along. I'll take what I like of your religion. You take what you like of mine. And what you eventually find is that true faith begins to fade. Yeah, Danny.
Talk about this and know the differences in the manuscripts. We were reading innocent where the ark went into the city and they looked, some of the men looked into it. And in the verse it says 50,700 men were killed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a footnote on that. It says, or it could mean 50 men and 70 oxen.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, talk about why.
It's a big difference, yeah. You'll get something similar with the height of Goliath. How big was Goliath?
7, 8, 9, 10 foot tall.
Yeah, so I grew up with 9'9", which if you take the cubits, what was that, 18 inches, and then you do it all. 9'9" is what I remember. There are some manuscript evidence suggests he would be 6 foot something. Now, either way, he's a giant by those standards. Wasn't George Washington 6 foot something? And he would have been one of the tallest men in America, which really helped him well. So there seems to be some manuscript issues there. Another one would be, what is the mark of the beast?
666.
No, I think it's 616 or something like that. Don't quote me on that. It's a manuscript issue. So if you really get into all that sort of stuff, you try to take this other manuscript tradition, and it probably is 666. I'm really just poking the bear. But there are manuscripts that changes that middle number, and if the 666 or whatever it is correlates to letters, I think you've studied this, Danny, that if it doesn't mean Nero, can you get a different name if you change the number? I don't know. Yeah. I'll tell you a quick story on this regard. Are we still recording? I mean, it's fine, but okay, it doesn't matter. Mom called me. I was still in seminary, and she was